And welcome everybody. So our third introduction panel of our series on ITSM metrics taking place today, and give you a little bit of a brief introduction about this series and what we're trying to accomplish, and then we'll kind of get into the heart of it and have our panelists answer our prepared 3 questions. And we encourage you all answer the poll, if you will, as far as we've got a few polls throughout the session that we'll try to get some feedback, and we are definitely looking for you to engage in chat and or the Q&A. If you have questions you want the panelists to answer, I recommend using the Q&A because that's easier to manage. But if you just want to engage with everybody, that's what the chat is there for as well. So the purpose of this panel series is for us to do a few things. We are trying to present some case studies around how various institutions are using metrics to help drive decision making and do other things. We are also trying to just simply get the wisdom of all of our panelists into a written format, transcripts, using the captioning, so that we can try to help guide some of that content into some papers that we can publish through EDUCAUSE. And then the last thing is we're trying to create this idea of a journey map that helps identify, kind of what is a common journey and what are some of the sticking points. We have a little bit of an illustration here of kind of like a Candyland analogy around, as you go down this journey of using metrics, different things that you might encounter, sticking points that you might encounter. And then our goal is to generate some reactions about how you might get through and around those obstacles over time. So with that, our first introduction, or our third introduction panel here, we have 3 panel. Oh, sorry, I forgot about this. We do have a whole series of other things planned over the course of this year. So be on the lookout for us to each of our panelists will be giving kind of their own personal use case deep dives. We plan to have sessions specifically around several ITSM practices, a lot of interest around service desk, for example. We'll make sure to hit that one, but others as well, and let us know what you'd like to see. We plan to have some sessions specific around services. So think Wi-Fi, think printing, think things like that, and how we use metrics in those kind of environments. And then lastly, something that targets kind of metrics for the executive level and what institutions are doing, and some recommendations for how to make that go well. So with that, actually get to the introduction of our 3 panelists today, starting first with Hema.
Thanks, Bob. Hi, everybody. My name is Hema. I'm AVP, Associate Vice President for Planning and Digital Transformation at CSU Sacramento. And I'm new to CSU Sacramento. I just joined last September. So I lead PMO, data warehouse team, and our campus application team there. Prior to that, I have 10 years of higher ed experience, and I have handled various initiatives from project portfolio management, ERP implementations, and ITIL service catalog formation for our prior institute, and have used various methodologies as well, PMP, Agile, design thinking, and a lot of process improvement work that I have been part of as well. I have total 25 years of experience in various industries, higher ed 10 to 12 years, and prior to that, consulting, telecom, to say a few. I'll pass on to Scott.
Excellent. Thanks, Emma. Hello, everyone. Scott Nemus here, manager of ITSM at UC Berkeley. Relatively new to the role, been at Berkeley less than a year. And in that capacity, we've recently established an ITSM team. So I have 2 colleagues you may come across in the EDUCAUSE community, Lisa Hisson and Sarah Gonzalez, who work with me on the ITSM activities. In my career, prior to Berkeley, I was at San Francisco State University, which is part of the CSU system. And prior to that, I was in private sector, spent some time as a consultant, as a service management analyst. And so as we go through this, I'll be sharing some of those, some of that perspective as well. Currently at a ServiceNow shop, but have used other ITSM applications throughout my career, and have spent quite a bit of time throughout my career doing systems implementation, app migration, business intelligence, audit and compliance, and endpoint management, project management, oversaw service desk team. So it's been a good run, and hopefully, some of what I share here is useful to you. And with that, I'll turn it over to Anne.
Hi, I'm Ann Gerwitz. I'm the director of ITSM at the University of Delaware. I have about 10 years of higher ed experience. Have been working with our departments across the University of Delaware. We're at I would say a low maturity for service management. So it's been an interesting journey from that perspective. Have been providing guidance and about service management best practices without actually using a lot of the service management nomenclature. It seems to scare people. And I've also had experience working with government contracting, with telecom. I have certifications in PMP and Vital Expert.
All right. Well, very good. And thank all three of you so much for being willing to come here today and share your metrics experiences. So I've put up the second poll around where everyone is in their maturity or where they rate themselves. And to kind of get the conversation started, let's start with our first question. And Hema, if you want to get us going with, what types of metrics have you been involved in generating and using?
Thanks, Bob. Sure. So as I said, I am new to Sac State and I joined in September, but I would say the metrics collection in our IT division started with COVID. Well, that's when it got more prominent, and there were a lot of dashboards that they were projecting to the campus at that point, because there were hotspots and Wi-Fi's that we were providing to our students to be able to connect from garage to attend classes online. And there were a lot of paper process in Sacramento State, and we were automating a lot of it to enable operations to go smoothly during the COVID time. And that's when it all started. And our CIO then wanted every manager to start looking at metrics that are valuable to show to campus how IT adds value to them. Is there a question? Okay. So in order to show the IT's value to the campus, our CIO expressed importance of generating metrics, and he wanted every manager to look into that. So a lot of managers started producing metrics, but there was no consistent process, and each manager used their own wisdom to generate metrics based on what data is available and what's meaningful to manage their team and those kind of stuff. So a lot of our metrics initially to start with were operational and tactic in nature. So things like usage related metrics, availability related metrics, and some quality related metrics. So some of the examples I could give is on the data warehousing side, we were looking at, we were showing the availability of our data marts, and also providing dashboards on what reports are accessed by what users and how frequently it's being used, such kind of metrics. And on the service desk side, average time to resolve tickets, first response time, and how long a ticket sits in a queue. And there was a goal of 80% of the tickets need to be answered within 5 days or less. And there was also user experience survey that we had to get how well we are serving the campus. On the PMO side, we had a lot of volume metrics on how many projects we are completing successfully during a fiscal year, how many of the projects we are strategic in nature that it meets the campus goal. And we also had customer satisfaction survey. On web and mobile, we had statistics on how many users are downloading our mobile app, how many hits we are getting to certain specific portals. Security side, we were tracking on vulnerabilities, phishing, storage units we are providing. So these are some to touch upon. And also we were a big way into the digital transformation metrics, where we were providing statistics and a trend. There, I would say we were little matured than rest of the group in terms of creating a trend metrics, because that had been tracked from 2018 onwards. So like how many paper forms we have automated, how many of those forms are being used, and how that has grown over time, over the years, and which units were more moving towards digitization and digital automation. So those were some of the metrics that we collected, and I will go into how we started generating that and how we are evolving in the couple of other next questions.
All right. Thank you, Hannah. I have forgotten who was second. Is it Scott or Ann?
Scott.
Yeah, I'll go next, Bob. So similar to him, I recently joined UC Berkeley. And so, one of the things that Berkeley had in place prior to my joining is, they had a one IT dashboard. And so as groups onboarded to the service management tool, they had the option to take advantage of this dashboard. And on it, it included things like response times, aged incidents, customer feedback, missing data. And so that would be kind of like incident quality or request quality to show, do we have data that we could do further analysis on? And then also major incidents. And that's something we continue to look pretty deep into. If I look back at my San Francisco State experience, one of the key metrics or key dashboards that we would do is the start of semester metrics. So the start of the fall, I'm sure you're all familiar with, is a very busy time for service providers, folks coming back from the summer, students moving in on campus. And so those metrics were a cross IT look at performance. So SIS response time, service desk call volume, wait time, service desk queue, and network response time. And so those were things that were distributed across campus leadership for the first couple days of the semester. It was really helpful to have early indicators as to whether things might not be going quite right. I mentioned in my career, I started in consulting, and one of my early roles was as a service management analyst. And I think one of the things I learned there was the importance of a service level agreement. And in higher ed, it's not quite the same from what I've experienced. We have service level expectations, kind of setting customer expectations as to what they can expect for response and resolution time. But I wanted to just share some of my experience in my consulting role, because we had service level agreements and we had commitments that we had to fulfill to the clients. And so if we miss those response and resolutions times, like Hema said, 80% met SLA. If you fall below that goal as a consultant, there'd be financial implications. And I think that's important for us in higher ed to remember, because we may have some outsourced service providers, and having those types of expectations defined in the contract can be valuable. In terms of other metrics, on-time delivery, that can be for projects. I think it's really important to look at on-time delivery, also for incidents response and resolution, and service request on-time delivery rates. I find time series trends really helpful. Service requests, I think time series trends identify candidates for automation. For incidents, it identifies candidates for problem management, where you could do root cause analysis and workarounds. And I think also from a time series perspective, it's age backlog. That's something we did at SF State to as teams are starting to come online with ServiceNow, we'd show them their aged backlog, and it really helped groups start to reduce that aging. We looked at the things that were over 6 months old and over 3 months old, and then groups really started to get their operational processes in tune with being more responsive to the things that came in. So saw that being really effective. Customer satisfaction. Everyone's familiar with the 5-point scale. We do that with incidents. We're starting to do that with request items. It's similar to Amazon or the App Store. You see something for 4.5 out of 5. It's good. It's a product you're probably going to be excited about. But the one thing I'll say is I've also seen with CSAT scores is you may have heard of the watermelon effect, where everything's green on the surface, the metrics look great, but then when you talk to the customers, it's kind of red under the surface. And so that's one thing to be careful of. I've noticed a lot of times with CSAT scores, if you're asking about service provider feedback, service providers often build good relationships with the customers they're serving, and that's what often will drive a high score. But they might not be happy with the service, and I think there's other factors there. And so one option to consider there that I've used in the past is NPS, Net Promoter Score, and it's a 1 to 10 scale, 9 and 10 being promoters, 6 and below being detractors. You can search online and see which companies get what types of Net Promoter Scores, and I think you'd probably relate to that if you've had experiences with certain companies. I know it's been meaningful to me. Service specific metrics. I think network connectivity, heat map showing where there's higher network load can help build out a network wireless coverage. Storage utilization, license utilization, I think is all really important. And beyond that, how those licensed users, how often are they using the product? And that can then tie into the finances around the services. All of this, though, I think is really important to be supported with capacity metrics. I think it's really important. That's one thing we're trying to start to, my team and I are trying to start to do at Berkeley, is to start to understand what is the overhead administrative time and operational time that's being consumed. I've seen a lot of teams, not just at Berkeley, but I've seen a lot of teams throughout my career. When you're up to 85 to 90% operational demands, it's very hard to do the new project stuff. 10% capacity is very limiting. And so, I think that's really important to understand, because all those other metrics, whether it's project on time delivery or incident response, all can be impacted by that. So I think with that, Ann, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks. So we are on the cusp of redoing a lot of things. We got our service management application and deployed it about middle of 2019. It was just for IT. And they had an old system, but they weren't really working with it from a metrics perspective. So one of the things that we talked about, and this was the first time we'd also had a service catalog, a service request catalog. So as we were talking through, they would also used to just having very generic forms. So working with the different groups to understand what information that they wanted to capture. And I always start from the perspective of, what would you want to report on? What would you want to be interested in seeing from this types of things? So that's kind of where we started. We also said that we would take a look at the data and after about a year, and then, repurpose everything. What was interesting is then, COVID happened. So all of that got on the back burner, but we started moving along from that perspective. So we do have different groups that are, I would say, areas of excellence, pockets of excellence in terms of their metrics. Our network infrastructure group, they can tell you to the hour what they were working on, whether it was a project for facilities, what they were doing, because they have built that up over time. We have other groups that basically what they can tell you is, I got these many tickets in and I'm working it through. So we are trying to start sharing that expertise between the groups so we can start setting those things up. And yes, we are looking from the operational perspective, how many tickets have we got in, how long does it take us to work through those. One of the things that we've noticed is the way we work tickets, we have a bit of a challenge getting that information back out from a reporting perspective. So we are looking at getting access to the data from the system itself, and then utilizing other tools to be able to report the way we want to. I would say one of the other things that was always interesting to me is that we had, when I first got here 5 years ago, they were in the process of putting together an IT strategic plan. And as part of that plan, it was always going to be a reporting component, and that was decided to be the annual report. So what we did was from across all of our departments, we put together what we call the wins worksheet. And so you had columns based on what the strategic objectives were. And as you went along each month, you would put your wins in terms of, you know, your group did X, and this is how it provided value to the university. And so at the end of the year, we would have an annual report, and that report would be very much focused on the different audiences through the university. So we would show, you know, all the things that we did to support research, all the things that we did to support faculty, that type of thing. And that has been, I think, fairly successful in promoting the information because, again, we care about the details, the day-to-day, the operational, but the university cares more about what have you done for me in terms of what can, you know, how are you supporting what I need to do on a day-to-day basis. So that was something that has been, I think, well received and has been fairly easy to do. So, and I would say the other two areas, so we do have services, and for the first time, I started pulling reports together in terms of how many requests were we getting by service, so that they could see maybe, okay, I'm getting a lot of requests about this service. Is there something that we need to look at from this service that might need to be, you know, addressed? Were they incidents or were they just requests? And, you know, this is a really popular service. One of the things that we did, because we had deployed Zoom, I think like July of 2019. So we were just showing how many people were using Zoom. We were showing that as COVID hit. And that was very interesting to a lot of people to show this was a service and how it was being utilized across the campus.
Okay, we did have a couple questions pop into chat that I think are related to this first question. So if you guys don't mind, I'll kind of interject those real quick. I think we were hitting on this a little bit, but some of the conversation that's going on in chat right now is around who defines the metrics to monitor. And the comment, and this is from Brian, by the way, specifically is around it'd be easy to cherry pick the ones, or to his words, to pick the ones we know will be favorable. So how do we make sure that we're not just picking the metrics that tell the story we want to tell, is how I'm interpreting that question. I don't know if any of you have thoughts or comments.
So that one nicely leads into our second question that I was planning to cover, Bob. So I will go over there on how we started with. So as I said, COVID was the key trigger for our CIO to press our team to generate metrics to the external partners, because the metrics we generated and the dashboard we produced during the COVID period was well appreciated by the campus, and that was very helpful. So he wanted the managers to think through and produce more dashboards. Now the managers wanted to know what metrics they need to produce in their dashboard, and the answer from our CIO is, you are the managers, you are the service managers, you know who your clients are, you should know what metrics would be meaningful for your customers. So this went on in a loop for a while, and after that, he added that to the goals of our individual managers to come up with metrics and start at least producing that during our during the supervisors one-on-one and discuss about what that metrics means and stuff. So that's what started this pockets of excellence. I see in the poll as well, most of our audience are in the pockets of excellence category, and we are also in that area at this point. So each manager interpreted their own way of dealing with metrics, and some went with what data is readily available and started to produce those metrics. But what was lacking was telling a story out of that metrics, what that metrics mean, and monitoring that, and taking actions based on what the metrics is trying to say. So me and my peer AVP started an initiative of metrics program within our IRT, and had a metrics working group where we had representation from each of the IT areas, and started to define some parameters under which metrics need to be defined. It's the managers who need to come up with the metrics for their division, but we provided some guardrails or guidance where we wanted them to think about metrics at 3 levels. Strategic, think about some of the initiatives that you are doing in your area that aligns with the campus strategy or IRT strategic goal, and how you can show the value of meeting those goals. Produce some metrics in that category. And then tactical metrics, more quality related and customer service, those type of metrics, and then operational metrics. So people were able to produce a lot of operational metrics and tactical metrics. When it came to strategic metrics, we seemed to hit a roadblock. A lot of the strategic metrics required collaboration with our stakeholders and other campus units, because we are providing technology platforms, or providing services for the administrative functions or academic functions of the other units. So we didn't have a way to measure that without some help and resource assigned on the campus unit side. So we then went back and said, at this point, to list out initiatives, number of initiatives that are meeting our campus goals, and we are having a action item to improve our process to identify metrics when we have new initiatives with our campus units, what metrics we want to measure when we deploy that new initiative for the unit, and who would be responsible for generating that, and what kind of technology help in terms of dashboarding, reporting that might be needed from IT side to provide that. And we are evolving that. We are just starting that process. So this process worked out well. We are just in the middle of doing this at this point. So we have like 50% of our IT divisions were able to come up with a set of metrics that lined with strategic, tactical, and we gave a low bar of identifying 1 strategic metric, 2 tactical, and 5 operational at a minimum. So at least to start from somewhere. So 50% of our IT divisions are able to produce those metrics. Now we are in the process of figuring out how to streamline this and create a standardized process. So our data warehousing team is helping with our other IT teams to create dashboards and insights for the metrics that our IT divisions have identified. Now, I also work with our CIO to create a list of requirements for cabinet metrics. What would be meaningful for cabinet to produce. So we had a laundry list of things that our CIO would like to present to cabinet. And the IT managers took that and categorized those as what they can produce today, what they can produce probably in 6 months, 1 year, because they need to cultivate the data for that. And there are metrics there for which we don't even know where to find the data today. So those we are initiating as small projects to identify when we can get there. So that's the journey we are in. I would say we just started it. We have probably 30% there. We need to monitor and measure how it works. So hopefully I answered the question that came in the chat. And there was other question on load metrics. From our side on load metrics, right now our service desk is the one which is more focusing on load metrics on average, time to resolve, and peak periods when tickets come a lot, and they use that to man the service desk appropriately to manage the workload. Beyond that, on other areas, I have not seen yet a lot of load metrics.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Hema. So Scott, maybe have you chime in then, a combination of questions kind of floating out there, see which ones you want to tackle, but there's the, how did you get started? Do you have any comments around picking what metrics in that would be great as well? Or do you have comments around the question around load? Any of those three would be great.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. I'm looking at the responses and, definitely supportive of those. I think one of the things I've observed is, who defines the metrics? I think Mark, summarizes it really well, because those are going to be the folks who are the experts on it, right? So like a service owner, like a network lead, they're going to know what tools are available, and those tools are probably going to have the capability of extracting a lot of those, the peaks, the averages. And so those are things that like an ITSM office can help have those conversations, but I think those folks are often going to know what capabilities exist in the tool sets they have to report those metrics. In terms of, and Bob, I'll touch a little bit on question 2, where to get started. I think you hear, if you've tuned into any of the EDUCAUSE ITSM sessions, start where you're at is something I hear quite often. And just to reiterate something Hema said, start small. Don't try to, take it all on at once. I've been at several organizations, and some have had no metrics existing when I started, and some had some mature metrics already defined. So, start where you are. If you don't have anything defined, then start small. And understanding what you're looking to measure and improve on, I think is important. And that's really where those roles that that Mark commented on in the chat, I think really comes into play. If I talk to a service desk lead, or if I talk to a service manager, or if I talk to an executive, they're all going to have different perspectives, and they're all going to have different expertise based on what their role is. And so they're going to know a lot more about the specifics than I will. And so I think as an ITSM technician, I can help facilitate those conversations. But ultimately, I think it's going to be largely, their expertise that helps shape it. I think the other thing to consider is, the service, if you're just getting started, consider the service management system that you're on. A lot of them have out of the box metrics already. And so I think, as you're if the system's implemented, or if, more particularly if you are implementing it, understanding how those are intended to be used is important when you're doing the configuration. If you go off and do your own thing, a lot of times you're not going to be able to take advantage of those standard capabilities. And so, understanding what's out of the box, I think often provides a good starting point as well. And also, understanding what's manageable. So it is easy to get consumed with all kinds of metrics. If you do a search on the web, you're going to get all kinds of stuff. You could probably even ask ChatGPT how to get started. I'll probably give you a good answer. But understanding what capacity you have to take on based on what those metrics identify, I think is often important. So if you get into a big metrics program and you're not able to take action, that could be a difficult position to be in. So.
Right. Thank you, Scott. And see if you have anything to add as far as how to get started and the load question, or just, defining which metrics, who weighs in on which metrics to get.
So I'll go with how you got started, or how you get started. One of the things that I've always noticed if I come in someplace new is that, somebody's always doing some kind of metrics somewhere. And the first question I ask is, who are the metrics for? Who asked for them? Who gets them? Because I found more often than not that a lot of times they're just doing it by rote. A long time ago, somebody asked for something. This is what they put together, and they send that out on a regular basis, and nobody looks at it. So then the next question is, who would be interested in information? And you talk to those people. What information are you interested in? What really are you looking for? Are you looking for something that gives you some idea of the volume so that you know how your staffed is reasonable, or if you need more staffing? Are you looking for the staff that you have? Are they performing well? Is there something that you need to address from the perspective of, they may just not know that if you do X, Y, and Z, this can reduce the amount of time it takes to get, whatever they're doing done. So that's basically, where I always start. What are you doing today? Who gets it? Why do you do it? And then, who would be interested? What would they be interested in? What data do you have available? And if you don't have it available, what would you need to get the data to do what you need to do?
Awesome. Thank you, all three of you. So I'm going to do two things. I'm going to launch our last poll here too, which is a very open-ended poll for our participants. So as we turn the quarter into the end of this, if you have ideas of things you want us to take a closer look at or talk further about that you've heard today, or things that were on your mind coming in that you haven't heard today, let us know in that poll so that we can line something up with a future presentation and make sure we cover it. But and then I'll have our panelists go around, and I think we've somewhat tackled this third question inherently in answering the first two, but I still want to ask it just to see if you had anything else to add. So starting with Hema, around how do you decide, who to include in your metrics conversations and who to target, I guess, with the metrics that you have been building?
Thanks, Bob. So to start with, in our metrics collection, we are trying right now to review the metrics internally within the IT division. And I appreciate Anne's input. The list of things that she said is what we have defined in our metrics template on when they are defining the strategic, tactical, and operational metrics, why this metrics is important, what trends you tend to collect, and how you plan to act on this metrics, and who is this metrics valuable for. So that then helps us to create audience specific metrics. And once we are very comfortable with the approach we are taking within the IT division, then the next step is to, as I said, we are also working on the cabinet metrics. So our CIO would like to present to the cabinet. And some of these metrics we are planning to get into our annual report, but that would require a story to be told with that metrics, what that metric means and where we are. For example, we are big on virtual lab implementation at this point. A trend metrics on usage of traditional lab to virtual lab would be helpful, and by colleges or departments. So we are trying to create those stories around that metrics to identify things that would be valuable and things that would be helpful for our campus units to appreciate on, and also to add inputs to it. So the next step is to bring some of these metrics that we are collecting to our campus stakeholders, regular meetings that we have, monthly touch points and checkpoint meeting, to show to them and get their feedback on what do they think about it, where they need help, where they have challenges, what else they would like to see, so that we can evolve this further in. So that's where we are at this point. With that, I will pass on to Scott.
Thanks, Emma. From my perspective, I tend to lean towards transparency when it comes to who to share metrics with. I've seen some higher ed organizations posting it on their department website, which I really appreciate. Never gotten that far with the organizations that I've been with, but I always admire those that do publicize those. And I think it's also important, similar to what Hema was saying. Are we talking about broader organizational metrics that align, that are more strategic metrics, or are we talking about team-specific operational metrics? Those would be more so contained within a team. The other thing, and I think Lucas might have mentioned this in the chat, but I think when we're talking about who to include and who to share it with, it's important to position metrics appropriately. Position them as a tool for improvement, or position them, if they're going to be used for punitive actions, then bad behavior is going to result. So if you're going to be ever using them to measure a technician's performance, the technicians that I've seen will start to pick up password resets because they're easy. And so that's the type of behavior. You want to just be careful what behavior you're driving. I've also seen technicians, and I haven't seen this in higher ed, but I've seen this more in private sector, where they'll say, hey, I'm closing this out because I'm about to breach the SLA. Well, that's not the point of the SLA. You close it out when the service has been provided, service has been restored. The other thing is, I think I mentioned earlier on customer satisfaction, as we talk about metrics and who to share them with. I think there's also a qualitative component. And I think, you know, one of the things that I've seen be really effective, and I think Hema talked about this a little bit in her previous answer, having those interviews with the stakeholders and understanding like what is the you know, what is the word on the street in their organization for the service that we're providing as an IT organization, and actually having those interviews on, you know, whether it's annual or whether it's twice a year, I think can really go a long way in kind of avoiding that watermelon effect that I mentioned earlier on. And so I've seen that, you know, I've seen with the consulting firm I worked with, they actually did that with the clients. And it was a very good way to kind of tell a more complete story and understand what that service experience is like for the customers who are receiving that service. So, yeah. Anne, over to you.
Okay. So, yes, we've had lots of discussions about, you know, what metrics to share with whom. As an example for the surveys. So we've configured our service management application. So when somebody comes back and has, you know, something nice to say specifically about a technician, then that is set up to automatically forward that comment back to the technician so that they get to see it. We also have a report for the supervisors. So if there are you know, people who don't have as good an experience, they get that information so they can go back and look at the ticket and kind of see what transpired, and then can talk to the technician about how they might approach that situation in the future. So not punitive, about learning, about improving. One of the things in terms of, you know, who to include and who to share with. One of the things that we're doing here is we're relaunching our IT governance, and that's all about the services. And so I am talking to the different groups that we're talking to from that perspective to find out what information they want about services. It's interesting to find out that the major question is, what are the services? But when they say what are the services, they're not just talking about your central IT services. They want to know about what everybody's using all over campus, any application. And they're kind of like, okay, so that gets you thinking about how you could start pulling that information together for them. Because there's so many departments, I think you've all experienced this, where, you know, they got to get something done. They see this little app that they can get with their procurement card, and it's only, you know, $50 a month or whatever, and they're off to the races. And then you find out that you've got different pockets throughout the university that are maybe doing the same thing. And that might be something that you could bubble up to an actual service that you provide to the university, as opposed to everybody finding their own solution. So those are the type of service metrics that, you know, that we're looking at. And that's how I'm looking at maybe possibly compiling that and then sharing that with the university.
Awesome. Very good. A question that was hiding in chat from Mike that thought we could kind of tack on here, because I think we have a few minutes, asking specifically about accreditation. If any of you have been asked or have contributed metrics that would support accreditation efforts.
No, I have not worked on metrics related to accreditation.
No.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. That's a good one for us to kind of plant the seed among all of our panelists and
Right.
try to tackle at a future thing. So awesome. Thank you guys. And then another, it wasn't specifically a question, but I think there is some commentary in the chat that I thought might make a good question. So I'm going to draw one out if you guys don't mind, which is this idea of how do you avoid looking like a solution looking for a problem? You know, I feel like there can be a sense of there's a lot of data, a lot of metrics, and, you know, we're just running around trying to get someone to care. So, you know, I don't know, do you guys have any thoughts on how to navigate that?
I guess I always look at metrics as you're trying to address an issue. So I'm trying to figure out how to manage my work. I am trying to figure out how to express to upper management how the performance is on this particular service. So that if we are having an issue with this vendor, with this service, with the, so that you've got that information and can start that conversation about maybe this needs to be replaced. So that's how I look at metrics, not as I do metrics because somebody's going to ask me for, information about what I do. I'm looking at metrics as this is what I use in order to answer questions. And, one of the other things I always ask the other department heads is, what kind of questions are you getting? Who are you getting them from? Because that gives you an indication of what's of concern to others.
Right. So one other thing where we use metrics is to show resource limitation, to create a case for need for budget to add positions. We keep adding technologies, but we don't retire technologies. So the total cost of ownership is a bigger thing when we do any new initiatives and try to add the maintenance cost associated with that and what that means to in future available resources to do strategic initiatives, projects, enhancements, and so forth. So we have used that to show that we have been able to do a lot of digital transformation initiatives when we had CSU-wide funding for that. Now that funding had gone down and we are having a lot of backlog and showing that trend over the years, how much we achieved and now how less we are able to do. So those kind of metrics have been helpful too. Not that we got a lot of money, but at least to build the case.
I think, Bob, I think in one of the slides you shared the future panel sessions, and one of them I think is going to be around service metrics. And I think, if I'm a service manager, to understand the value that the service is providing to the organization, or the user, how many users do we have, how much hardware costs, license cost, support costs are needed to support that. Do we have a lot of users and it's cost effective, or do we have very few users and it's very costly? I think is important. Also quality metrics, I think are it's very useful to see from a change management perspective, how many incidents are we generating? Do we have to revisit our test criteria? And so, those are things, not trying to put the solution out and then find the problem, but just, what is the state of the service that we're managing? I think is something that, we're trying to get to.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. And I should also kind of convey for the group, I thought Andrea had a great comment in this thread around, just the age-old adage, you cannot manage what you cannot measure. And so I think a lot of us that are driven in this metric space are looking at it from the perspective of, we've got to be careful. We can't just spend all our time and resources putting forth metrics, but for the ones that we do have, they help us understand whatever we're looking at, as many measurements as we can get. I go to the doctor's office, I want them to, whatever measurements they can get that can help me establish my current state of health, it was great. And if they could get more without sending me off to tests, that would be even better. So, I think a lot of us look at it the same way. They just provide insight into how things are going. So
yeah, and also helps to set the expectation with our stakeholders and create a partnership in building that business case and asking for funding in some of the situations where it is really limiting the service of our campus units. And I think Mark has his hand up.
oh, you're muted though, Mark.
Thank you. God, I hate it when that happens. I was just going to offer one quick thought, and it's kind of the genesis of it is what you said, Bob, earlier. You were kind of joking about Chat GPT, but in all seriousness, I think those of us who are metrics, practitioners, we're service management practitioners or service owners or whatever, we all recognize that, historically, the best practice has been not to fall into the pitfall, the trap of just gathering a bunch of data that we could easily gather and then trying to figure out what can we present from all this data, right? Like the idea was, no, start high level, like, and again, depending on the audience, but like at the executive level, it's like, well, what are the goals we're trying to accomplish as an organization? What are the strategies towards those goals? What are the actions we can take to implement those strategies? And then ultimately, what are the metrics we can measure to gauge our performance on those actions, right? Like just as one example, right, in that various audience thing. But I think modern day data analysts and AI gurus will tell you, actually, no, now because storage is cheap and data is so easily gathered, and we have intelligence engines that you can kind of just loft this data into and say, paint me a picture. Like now it is sort of the best practices. No, if you can gather it, keep it, and then feed it into an intelligence engine that can come back and identify trends and things like that way faster than humans and the human eye can. So I think it's interesting how AI has kind of changed the game, right, in terms of the starting approach, which used to be no, don't just gather metrics for the hell of it just because you can. Now it sort of is. The data analyst will say no, if you've got data, sort of the Bob's comment about the doctor, right? No, the more you can tell me about my health, the better, or whatever data points you have, I'll take. So I think it's just an interesting shift in our industry as service practitioners. So that's all I wanted to offer.
Yeah, great. Thanks for chiming in, Mark. Appreciate you. So very good. Well, it does get us through our 3 questions. So and we do have a few minutes, but we don't have to continue if we've said everything we have to say. But I just thought maybe I'd offer our panelists any last thoughts or parting kind of comments as you listen to the conversation here. Anything you didn't say that you wish you had before we sign off?
I would say start small, starts where you have some data to produce metrics, and to, as others have said, look at the goals and what value we can show or what story we can say. We have to start somewhere, start small, build, target towards the goal, get feedback from the campus stakeholders, and keep evolving, because it's not like a project once initiated, completed, done, and we move on to the next. You need to keep monitoring and improving on it. And some metrics may become obsolete after some time, like all our COVID metrics is no more valuable. So you need to be aware of that as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say, add your metrics to your continual improvement list so that you're reviewing them on a regular basis. And are these still, are these still needed? Are these still valid?
I think just having conversations with those different roles. I know Mark laid out several of them. I had one of our ServiceNow team members a couple months ago share an example of a knowledge management dashboard that he had, and he said one morning he came in and views on Wi-Fi articles were trending, and sure enough, there was a Wi-Fi outage later on that day, and so that became more apparent about an hour or two later. So there's really creative ways to have metrics help us, and I thought that was one that kind of, it was the first time I had seen that, but it's a great example that you can be real creative and get some good stuff out of it. But as Emma and Ann have said, manage expectations accordingly. Don't try to go too far too fast.
No, that's awesome. A really good, very specific use case built up to the end there. So awesome. Thanks, Scott. And genuine thanks to our panelists for coming today and sharing. This is the beginning of a conversation and not the end. So if you haven't, complete that poll or send us a note or engage with us on the EDUCAUSE CG, EDUCAUSE Connect thing with comments and questions that you hear in this discussion. We hope to have a whole series of events around metrics and dashboards. So we definitely want to cater that content to the things that you would like to hear more about. So thanks everyone for being here today, and really appreciate you, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.